Federal agents searched a house in Albuquerque looking for cocaine and walked into a private collection of dozens of venomous snakes instead. Homeland Security Investigations was working a routine drug case, and that's when wildlife officers, animal handlers, and reptile experts got called in to deal with a discovery nobody on the search warrant saw coming. By the time the operation wrapped up, agents had recovered cocaine, cash, and firearms. Somewhere between 60 and 62 snakes came out of that house too. More than 50 of them capable of killing a grown adult with a single bite. Cases like this rarely cross paths with each other. Narcotics investigations and exotic animal seizures usually belong to entirely different worlds, handled by entirely different agencies, built on entirely different bodies of law. What follows is the story of how a narcotics investigation in New Mexico turned into one of the strangest federal seizures in recent memory, and why the two halves of this case, the drugs and the snakes, are now moving through the system on completely separate tracks. The investigation begins. Most federal drug cases start quietly, months before anyone outside law enforcement knows they exist, and this one was no different. Homeland Security Investigations learned in April that a man living in Albuquerque's South Valley was trafficking cocaine. Agents didn't move in right away. Instead, they built the case the way HSI typically does, from the inside. That approach is deliberate. Undercover buys give federal prosecutors something a single search warrant often can't: a documented pattern repeated over time that's hard to challenge in court later. An undercover agent got introduced to the suspect, and over the following weeks, between April and May, the two met 3 separate times. Each meeting followed the same pattern. The suspect sold the undercover agent multiple ounces of cocaine, according to court records. Slow and methodical, this was the kind of build-up investigators used to establish a paper trail solid enough to justify a search warrant. The sort of foundation that, if the case ever goes to trial, becomes nearly impossible for a defense attorney to dismiss as coincidence or entrapment. Nothing about the case stood out at this point. It read like hundreds of other HSI narcotics investigations working through the federal system at any given time. A distribution-level dealer, a handful of controlled buys, a South Valley neighborhood that looked, from the street, like any other quiet residential block in Albuquerque. Agents were building toward an arrest, and eventually a larger transaction that would let them close the case with a warrant in hand. There was no indication at this stage that the house itself held anything beyond what a typical narcotics search turns up: product, packaging material, maybe a scale, maybe a weapon kept for protection. It's worth understanding briefly what HSI actually is and why an agency most people associate with immigration enforcement was the one running a cocaine case in the first place. Homeland Security Investigations is the primary investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, and while it's often linked in the public mind to ICE's immigration functions, its actual mandate is far broader. It investigates transnational crime of nearly every kind, from drug and weapons trafficking to financial crimes, cybercrime, and smuggling. With thousands of special agents working cases across the country and internationally, HSI routinely partners with the DEA, FBI, and state and local task forces on narcotics investigations exactly like this one, particularly when a case has ties, however loose, to cross-border trafficking networks. Planning the arrest court paperwork shows agents had, at one stage, planned to arrest the suspect on July 15th, timed around an alleged cocaine transaction. That's a common tactic in cases like this, waiting for the target to be in physical possession of a fresh supply, which strengthens the eventual charges and reduces the chance that evidence gets destroyed or hidden before agents can act. That plan shifted though, and agents moved forward instead with a search warrant for the man's home in the South Valley, an area of Albuquerque near Bridge Boulevard and Old Coors Road, a stretch of the city dotted with modest single-family houses and small lots. Like most narcotics warrants, this one was built around what investigators expected to find: drugs, cash, weapons, evidence tying the suspect to distribution. Judges don't sign off on search warrants without probable cause, and that probable cause is typically limited to what the supporting affidavit actually describes. Nowhere in the paperwork supporting that search warrant was there any mention of snakes. Whatever agents expected walking into that house, a reptile collection wasn't it. In hindsight, that gap between what the warrant authorized and what agents actually found is part of what makes this case so unusual, and part of why the snakes ended up handled by an entirely separate agency once discovered. There's a legal wrinkle worth noting here too. When agents encounter evidence of a second, unrelated crime during a lawful search, In this case, the apparent absence of permits for keeping venomous exotic animals. That discovery typically falls under what's known as the plain view doctrine, which allows officers to seize evidence of additional wrongdoing they weren't specifically looking for, as long as they're lawfully present and the evidence is immediately apparent. That's part of why the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish was able to step in and act quickly without needing a second, separate warrant covering the animals. The raid agents executed the search warrant on July 22nd. What they found matched the drug case exactly as expected on one front. Officers recovered a half-pound of cocaine, 3 firearms, and $22,000 in cash, the kind of haul that confirms a distribution operation rather than casual possession. In federal narcotics cases, that combination of quantity, weapons, and cash is often what separates a simple possession charge from something closer to a full distribution or trafficking indictment. That's when things took a turn. Enclosure after enclosure, cage after cage. Agents began finding snakes throughout the home, not 1 or 2, but dozens, tucked into rooms, closets, and, in at least 2 cases, hidden inside ordinary household trash cans. What started as a standard search and seizure operation turned, room by room, into something closer to an impromptu wildlife inventory, with agents trained for narcotics work suddenly finding themselves cataloging animals instead of drugs. Neighbors watched the operation unfold from outside. Vans arrived and left throughout the night, one man living nearby recalled, hauling away cage after cage as the operation stretched on for hours, a scene that, by his account, looked less like a typical police raid and more like an extended methodical evacuation. A woman living close by said something had seemed off on trash days for a while. She'd snakeskin occasionally caught in the wind from the bins outside the home, though at the time she had no idea what it meant. Looking back, she said, the signs had been there for months. She simply hadn't had a reason to connect them to anything. For a residential block that had, by most accounts, seemed entirely unremarkable, the raid left a lasting impression. Several neighbors said in the days afterward that they were still processing the idea that dozens of venomous snakes, including one of the deadliest species on the planet, had been living a few dozen feet from their own front doors, completely unbeknownst to them for what may have been months or longer. What was actually inside? Because the animals weren't anticipated in the original warrant, agents had to call in specialists. The New Mexico Department of Game and Fish got brought in to catalog, seize, and safely remove the collection, and what they found was, by any standard, extraordinary. Reports on the exact number vary slightly. Some put the total at 60 snakes, others at 62. But every account agrees on the essentials. More than 50 of them were highly venomous. King cobras, spitting cobras, green mambas, pit vipers, reticulated pythons. The collection ran the gamut, and tucked among them was a single inland taipan, widely regarded as the most venomous snake on Earth. The inland taipan is native to the arid interior of Australia, rarely encountered even by herpetologists in its natural habitat, and virtually never found in private hands in the United States, given how tightly regulated venomous exotic species are supposed to be. Its presence in an Albuquerque residential neighborhood, sitting alongside cocaine and cash, is what turned this from an unusual footnote into a genuinely singular case. Some of the animals even had names. Court and seizure records list 2 pythons called Sunset and William, and 2 cobras named Blizzard and Pablo Escobar. Both a black king cobra and a green mamba turned up stored inside plastic trash cans inside the home, a detail wildlife officials found particularly alarming, since those containers offer little in the way of secure, temperature-controlled housing for animals that require very specific conditions to survive, let alone conditions that would keep anyone else in the house safe from an accidental bite. People who work with reptiles professionally were stunned by the scale of it. One reptile store manager asked about the collection, zeroed in on the inland taipan specifically. A bite from that species, he explained, is considered so severe that survival without immediate, specialized treatment is unlikely. And even hospitals in the United States rarely stock anti-venom for a snake that isn't native to this continent. Feeding a collection this size, he estimated, could run several $100s a week, which underscores just how much time, money, and knowledge it took to maintain in secret. This wasn't a casual hobby, but something closer to a full operation, run quietly alongside a cocaine trafficking business in the same house. A professional snake handler brought in to help relocate the animals put it in different words, but landed on the same point. Finding one of the most lethal snakes on the planet living quietly in a private home outside Albuquerque wasn't something he expected to encounter in this line of work. Handlers like him are typically called in for far more mundane jobs: a loose pet snake in someone's garage, an escaped ball python found under a porch, which makes the scale and danger level of this particular collection stand out even among professionals who see unusual animal situations on a regular basis. The exotic and venomous pet trade, for context, exists in a strange legal gray zone across much of the country. Some states ban private ownership of venomous snakes outright. Others allow it with permits, insurance, and strict caging requirements, and a handful have essentially no regulation at all. New Mexico falls somewhere in the stricter category, requiring permits for dangerous exotic species. Permits that, according to wildlife officials, the suspect in this case did not appear to hold for any of the animals recovered from his home. No charges. Yet, here's the thing that separates this case from a typical drug bust, despite the scale of the seizure. As of the most recent reporting, the suspect had not been charged. Warrant affidavits were unsealed in court, but the news outlets that obtained them chose not to identify the man, since no formal charges had been filed against him. That's a meaningful distinction. Under federal law, unsealed affidavits describing evidence recovered during a search are not the same thing as an indictment, and until formal charges are filed, the presumption of innocence still applies in full. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office for New Mexico offered no comment when asked directly whether charges were coming. That silence is fairly normal in an active federal case. Prosecutors rarely telegraph their next move, particularly while an investigation may still be expanding to include additional evidence, additional witnesses, or, in a case this unusual, additional agencies weighing in on charges related to the animals themselves. It means the legal outcome here, both for the drug charges and for anything related to the snakes, remains unresolved, and it may stay that way for weeks or months while prosecutors decide exactly how to proceed. Legal observers note that a case like this could ultimately produce two entirely separate sets of charges, moving on two entirely separate timelines: federal narcotics and firearms charges tied to the cocaine, cash, and guns, and, potentially, state wildlife or exotic animal violations tied to the snakes, depending on what New Mexico's Department of Game and Fish decides to pursue once its own review is complete. The aftermath. What happens to 60 snakes? Seizing the drugs and cash was the straightforward part. Figuring out what to do with dozens of live, dangerous animals was not. Wildlife officials confirmed the snakes were examined professionally after the seizure and appeared to be in good condition, and since each type of snake requires different care, housing, and safety protocols, they were relocated to a permitted facility equipped to handle venomous species. That's no small logistical task, moving dozens of animals that require individualized enclosures, temperature control, and specialized handling equipment, all while making sure none of them pose a risk to the officers responsible for transporting them. 30 days. That's the window New Mexico law gives anyone who has an animal legally seized from them to arrange for its transport out of state and cover the cost of its care and transportation. Miss that window, and the animal is considered abandoned. It's a detail that adds a strange bureaucratic epilogue to an already unusual case. A legal clock now ticking on the fate of more than 60 snakes, completely separate from whatever happens with the cocaine charges. In practice, that means the outcome for Sunset, William, Blizzard, Pablo Escobar, and the rest of the collection could be decided well before, or well after, any resolution in the criminal case tied to the man who kept them. Wildlife officials also noted they were unaware of any permits the suspect held for keeping exotic or venomous animals in the first place. That raises its own set of questions entirely apart from the narcotics investigation. Questions about how a private collection of this scale and danger level existed, undetected, in a residential neighborhood, and questions about whether existing state oversight of exotic and venomous ownership is sufficient to catch situations like this before they're uncovered by accident in the middle of an unrelated federal drug raid. If the 30-day window passes without anyone stepping forward to claim and relocate the animals, the facility currently housing them would likely need to find longer-term placements, something conservation-focused reptile sanctuaries and accredited zoos sometimes take on in cases like this, given how difficult and expensive it is for smaller wildlife facilities to absorb dozens of venomous animals all at once, each requiring requiring its own specialized enclosure. Conclusion. This is a story that started, like so many HSI cases do, as a straightforward narcotics investigation. Months of undercover work, controlled buys, and a warrant built to confirm what agents already suspected. What made this case different wasn't the cocaine, the cash, or the guns. It was what agents found alongside them, a hidden collection of some of the most dangerous snakes on the planet, housed in an ordinary home, unnoticed by neighbors until the raid itself pulled back the curtain. The drug case will move through the federal system the way these cases normally do, quietly and likely out of public view until charges are filed, if they're filed at all. Cases like this can sit for weeks, sometimes months, while prosecutors weigh evidence, coordinate with other agencies, and decide exactly what to charge and when. For now, the only certainty is what was recovered on July 22nd. The cocaine, the cash, the firearms, and a collection of animals nobody expected to find behind an ordinary front door. But the 60-some snakes recovered from that South Valley home are now living out a very different kind of resolution. Examined, cataloged, and waiting on a legal clock of their own, in a facility built to hold what an Albuquerque neighborhood never knew was living next door. That 30-day window keeps ticking whether or not the criminal case moves forward, which means the fate of Sunset, William, Blizzard, Pablo Escobar, and the rest of the collection could be settled long before a single word is said in a courtroom about the cocaine. Two federal and state cases, born from the same knock on the same door, are now moving forward on tracks that may never intersect again. One measured in criminal statutes and sentencing guidelines, the other in a 30-day window and the fate of 62 snakes waiting to find out where they'll end up next. What lingers, though, isn't just the legal outcome. It's the picture the raid left behind. A quiet residential block. Trash cans that, it turns out, weren't holding trash at all. Neighbors who walked past that house for months, maybe years, with no idea what was coiled up a few feet away. Investigators who went in prepared for a drug bust and walked out needing wildlife officers, animal handlers, and a facility equipped for some of the deadliest animals on Earth. Whatever happens next, in the courtroom or in whatever permanent home is eventually found for 62 snakes that were never supposed to be in New Mexico in the first place, this case will likely be remembered less for the cocaine that triggered it and more for what was never supposed to be there at all.